All right, let's continue with reaction in the wake of what's happened in Venezuela at the weekend. Bring in now the EFF's International Relations Head, Nqobile Mhlongo, who joins us now via our video link. Nqobile, thanks very much indeed for your time. Welcome to the SABC News Channel. The EFF released a 4-page statement in the wake of what happened on Saturday, condemning what's happened in Venezuela. But I wonder, beyond that moral condemnation, what the party reckons can be done at a diplomatic level to try and at least ensure there's some kind of accountability. Nqobile, I'm not sure if you're able to hear us.
Hello. I was not able to hear the question. Can you please repeat that?
Sure. I was saying that I know the EFF has released a 4-page statement outlining their position here, coming out strongly to defend Maduro and condemn the US for their action. But beyond that moral condemnation, has the EFF thought about the kind of diplomatic steps that could be taken to try and correct this?
Thank you very much for having us here. Firstly, the EFF wants President Maduro to be immediately, and his wife immediately released without any further delay. That's number one. Number two, we're hoping that the UN Security Council takes an informed decision, and the veto powers that we've always complained about as the EFF, calling for the radical transformation of the UN Security Council. We're hoping that the veto powers that the US has are not going to overturn the decision that will be taken by the UN Security Council at the meeting that will be held later today. Another thing we've called for is that sovereignty of states ought to be respected. Venezuela is not a satellite state of the US, and it's also not undisputed territory of the US. So the interference of the USA in Venezuela has, one, broken all international laws. If you check the UN Charter Article 2, subsection 7, it strictly prohibits intervention of one state in affairs of another state and to decide who becomes government. By removing a legitimate president of Venezuela, the US has broken all international law. And you will recall, Ayanda, that there is no one or no country that is allowed to just go into another country and arrest or capture another person, whether it's a president or an ordinary citizen. It is not allowed. There's international law that ought to be followed before you can even arrest a criminal in another country. That's why to this day in South Africa, we're still begging to have that criminal Bushiri to come back and account for the crimes he's committed. Why? Because of international laws. You need to apply and get approval from the country to have a person arrested in the country. There was not even an international warrant of arrest issued on Maduro. So there was no reason why President Maduro and his wife ought to have been captured by the evil United States. But also we're calling for the rest of the world, people, peace-loving nations, to stand up to the bullying of the US and say, not in our lifetime, not in the 21st century, we will have one state controlling another sovereign state and really undermining their sovereignty and their territorial integrity. And we are saying that it should not be happening. And we must strongly condemn the US for their military action that they've carried out in Venezuela and caused instability. People are in the streets as we speak. They are protesting and saying that they demand President Maduro to come back to Venezuela to continue to lead their country, because he was leading very well. So beyond that, we're asking for UN Security Council to be transformed. This issue of veto powers in the UN Security Council has always been a problem for too long.
I hear you say Maduro was leading very well. I know part of the issues that are being debated is exactly that point. What evidence do you point to substantiate that?
Firstly, let's say, look at the people. I'm not sure if you've been following on the news, watching what is happening currently in Caracas and in the entire Venezuela. People are on the streets demanding that President Maduro be released and his wife come back to the country. That one shows for you that he was leading the people well, because if he was not leading the people well, the same people will be in the streets celebrating and saying that we're happy he's gone, we're happy we're no longer under his leadership. So the people, the Venezuelans themselves, are up in arms saying that we want our president to come back because they are happy with his leadership. Number two...
Well, Nqobile, before you continue there, apologies for interrupting you. There are also images, not only in Venezuela, but outside of the country, of people celebrating the capture of Maduro. So I'm not quite sure if, pointing to that really helps drive the point home about whether or not Maduro's leadership style, at the very least, was welcomed by all in Venezuela.
Okay, can I just finish or make another point? The fact that there's some disputed issues around his leadership style does not give America the right to go and remove Maduro. Like I've explained to you, the UN Articles 2, subsection 7 of the UN Charter still clearly prohibits the intervention of another state on the internal affairs of another state. Even here in South Africa, there's people who are not happy with the leadership of Ramaphosa, like ourselves and many other South Africans who have refused to vote for the ANC. But that does not mean that we will allow another foreign state to come and intervene on the internal affairs of South Africa. The internal affairs of Venezuela belongs to the people of Venezuela for them to resolve on their own without interference by the US. Now look what Donald Trump is saying. He says that they are now going to run Venezuela. Where in the world have you had one state running the affairs of another state? He's also now threatening the now vice president and acting president of Venezuela that he's also coming for her if she continues. What is the fight for? The fight is about the oil of Venezuela. That is what it's about. They want to control the oil of Venezuela. Donald Trump has said it many times. He's not even afraid of saying it, that since President Maduro took over, their companies, American companies, have been struggling to work and steal the oil of Venezuela. That is what it's about. So we are not going to allow natural resources of one country to be stolen by the US. They've done it all over the world for many years and many decades, and it was allowed. I'll give you an example, and look at what happened in Libya in 2011 when Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was killed by the then NATO-style agencies. That was now President Barack Obama. It was claimed that there's no democracy, there's no peace. Look what, after the intervention of the US, Libya has never known peace, have never known security. Look what happened in Iraq in 2003 when George Bush, a former president of the US, George Bush, went for the former and late president Saddam Hussein. He said that Iraq is harboring weapons of mass destruction. To this day, those weapons of mass destruction have never been found. So every time the US comes for a country, they first create propaganda and say, this is what is happening. Like they are doing now with South Africa, saying that there's a white genocide. When me and you and every citizen of South Africa knows that there's no such a thing. It's just propaganda to tarnish our image so that when they attack us and kill us, they will be justified. Their actions must be justifiable.
Yeah.
Where is the evidence that in Venezuela there's narco-terrorism? Where is it? It's not there.
Sure.
That's why they were tarnishing the image of Venezuela to finally capture, and then they want to put a puppet regime that will take instruction from the US so that they've got control of the oil in Venezuela. And it should never be allowed. We are asking President Maduro to hold on. We must know that we're fully behind him. We're asking the people of Venezuela to rally behind President Maduro and ensure that they protect the sovereignty of their country. Anywhere the US intervenes, they will never know peace, they will never know stability. There'll be hunger and go back to slavery in their country. They must refuse it with their last breath. They must be prepared to put their bodies on the line to defend the sovereignty and integrity of their country against the bullying of the USA.
If history is anything to go by, Nqobile, you and I both know that international law is often unevenly enforced, quite frankly, and you've cited some of the examples where it feels like there's very little accountable. So if you and I at least can agree on that, the question then becomes, what can realistically be done to hold powerful states like the United States of America accountable without doing things like, I don't know, compromising global stability?
We've always said we must be, as the EFF, that we must build economies that don't rely on the US and the dollar. We must de-dollarize. That's number one. Do away with the dollar when we trade amongst each other. We must isolate the US because they've decided to bully the rest of the world. They are now threatening even Cuba. They're threatening more countries in the Americans. So we're saying that all nations must go and build an alternative outside of the US. We must ensure that we build economies that are strong and build strong relations that at the exclusion of the US and ensure that we're able to sustain those relations and those economies and weaken the dollar and weaken the pulling tactics and the power that the US holds globally, and ensure that we do not allow NATO and their allies to establish in our countries, because when we have NATO allies near our borders, that's when they are easily able to send the military to do as they please and destroy our nations. So that's what we're calling for. let's build alternative to the US, let's de-dollarize, let's trade amongst each other's countries without using the dollar, and ensure that another thing we must fight is a radical transformation of the UN Security Council, that there is a country that enjoys veto powers. It must be a thing of the past, and the fact that the African soil is not properly represented in the UN Security Council must be a thing of the past. We must ensure that we build international laws that are enforceable. Look, there was an international warrant of arrest for Benjamin Netanyahu. Excuse me, to this day, he's still not arrested. To this day, he's protected by the US and any other police. So we must ensure that these international laws that we want to be enforceable are really enforceable, but we must build alternative and organs and that are able to hold all nations accountable equally without fear or favor.
All right, Nqobile Mhlongo, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Nqobile is the head of international relations with the Economic Freedom Fighters. Once again, appreciate the time.